From O'Malley storming up the octagon to confront his bitter rival, to seemingly having an upper hand in the next fight with the Funkmaster. Here's why Sean O'Malley called out Aljamain Sterling. You see, Sean took his chance straight after Sterling's bout ended. Aljamain recently faced off against Henry Cejudo, and they fought for the bantamweight title. A lot of people expected Henry to put up a better fight, but it ended with Sterling dominating him in the entire fight. There was a point during the 5th round when Cejudo looked like he was making a comeback. It didn't last very long. Eventually, the decision was left in the judges' hands, and they awarded the decision to Aljamain. What happened next was pretty insane. O'Malley decided to take his chance and storm the octagon to confront Sterling. He ended up calling out the American, asking for a bout against him. They cussed each other out a bunch, but really, both men were just trying to prove how macho they were. Things started to get heated pretty quickly, and it wasn't long before Dana had to step in between the two men. Honestly, from the way things were looking, it felt like a fight could have broken out at any second. Anyway, when all was said and done, it was clear that Sterling was ready to go up against O'Malley in the future. O'Malley even came out and talked about how he felt about the whole thing. Not long after the incident inside the octagon, the MMA world began to buzz, with everybody wondering if a bout between these two men would be taking place sometime soon. Sean made an appearance on the MMA Hour with Ariel Helwani and talked about the whole thing, shedding some light on everything going on in his head. O'Malley talked about how excited he is about the idea of fighting Aljamain Sterling. He mentioned how he's fought against fighters with a similar style to Sterling and that it would be a bit of a challenge. He mentioned how he trains with tough fighters and that a challenge like that wouldn't be anything new for him. However, that doesn't mean he'll be slacking off. If anything, he'll be gearing up to go to war against someone who can be considered the best bantamweight of all time. I'm not gonna lie, it's definitely going to be an entertaining fight to watch. He compared himself to Corey Sandhagen and mentioned how they both have similar body types. He even went as far as to joke about how he'll just need to last 12 seconds longer than Corey did in his bout against Sterling. He also talked about how he noticed that Aljamain had upgraded his cardio and that he was impressed. It's honestly pretty crazy that Sterling managed to go toe-to-toe with Cejudo for 5 rounds straight. Speaking of which, Aljamain had a bunch to say about the incident with Sean as well. While O'Malley was pretty calm talking about their potential bout, I can't say the same about Sterling. If anything, he seemed pretty pissed off at Sean and made it clear that he wasn't happy with how things went down. The American was asked to give his thoughts on the matter during his post-fight interviews. He kicked things off by cussing the Sugar Show out, then proceeded to lay down straight facts. He talked about how he'd just gotten done beating Henry, who happens to be an Olympic gold medalist in wrestling. He added that someone like Cejudo, who actually has good takedown defense, was putty in his hands. So when it comes to Sean, who's mainly a striker, there aren't many things he'd be able to do against him in the octagon. He seemed pretty confident that he'd be able to wrap things up pretty quickly if the fight were to take place. By the way, it's important to mention that O'Malley has been promised a title shot against Sterling. And now that Cejudo is out of the picture, their fight is probably going to be the next big thing on the menu. He even went as far as to predict how he'd win the fight and said that he'd make sure to keep pressure on O'Malley. Like, let him make stupid mistakes. Apparently, he plans to make sure that Sean is forced to fight on his back foot and eventually throw a crazy last-ditch kick. If he somehow goes through with it, he'd catch the kick and grab him. Once he has him in his arms, the fight will pretty much be over. It'll be interesting to see whether things actually end up working out that way. This begs the question, when will the fight end up happening? Now, under usual circumstances, fighters usually get around 6 months to prep for their next fight. We all knew that Sterling's showdown with O'Malley was a sure thing for this year. Though, Dana may have just spiced things up when he added that the UFC is planning to set it up in August. That's pretty insane to think about. I mean, Aljamain just went 5 rounds against one of the best bantamweight fighters of all time, so to think that he'd have to fight the Sugar Show so soon, well, it's not going to be easy. Thankfully, the American addressed this issue in his post-fight conference and said that he was open to the idea. He mentioned that it would probably end up being one of the fastest turnarounds in UFC history. He compared himself to Alexander Volkanovski, who had less than 4 months to prepare for his fight in Abu Dhabi, and yet he managed to get it done. With that in mind, Sterling talked about how he was fully prepared to take the fight. even though it was a bit early, as long as his body permitted it. If Sterling does manage to make it to the octagon, you have to wonder who will end up winning the fight. Picking a winner is going to be tough. Both of these dudes are insanely talented and have experience fighting against fighters with similar styles. I know one thing for sure, and that's the fact that both these guys have their work cut out for them. While Sterling may seem like he's confident about getting the win, he's probably worried about O'Malley surprising him with something new. He's just really good at hiding it. Oh, and an important thing to note is that Sean is going to have a huge advantage coming into this fight, because Sterling has less than 3 months to prepare for the fight, while O'Malley's been training for him for over a year. There's no doubt in my mind that the Sugar Show is going to pull up with some new tricks up his sleeve. He's shown in the past how versatile he is with his training. Honestly, the biggest advantage that Aljamain holds over O'Malley are his wrestling skills. Think about it. He managed to overpower Cejudo, who happens to be an Olympian and a 2-time champion. Henry's entire game is wrestling, and Sterling still managed to beat him. O'Malley hasn't gone up against any big-time grapplers in his career, so that's one area he's going to have to work on. Now, Sean did come out and talk about how he's worked on his ground game all year and that he's confident that he'll be able to deal with whatever Sterling throws at him. We can't really predict how things will turn out till the fight actually happens, but we did manage to get a pretty good idea when they face off in the octagon. Like I said before, things got pretty heated between these two when Sean decided to put up a bad boy act and storm the octagon. While it may not have been the best idea, it certainly got everybody talking about the bout and helped build up hype for it. These two don't seem to like each other very much, as they almost got into the brawl right there in the octagon before Dana separated the two men. Honestly, it was pretty entertaining to watch, as they threw down insults and squared up straight after Sterling's bout with Cejudo. From the looks of things, both of these guys look like they're getting ready to murder each other. There is no telling what they're going to throw at each other, and there's a good chance that the fight might end up going toward a judge's decision. See, while O'Malley might try and go for a knockout, Sterling will probably try and make sure to keep the fight on the ground. Remember, even though Sean's leveled up his ground game, Aljamain has been at it throughout his career. With that in mind, it's obvious that the American will have the upper hand. At the same time, Sean will have an easier time in the fight if he manages to keep it a stand-up. At the end of the day, it's all about who trains harder. The Sugar Show has had a lot more time to train, while Sterling will barely get any. If Aljamain can somehow catch up, he'll be able to take home the win easily. As far as the statistics are concerned, Sean holds a better record in this matchup. Still, there's no question in my mind that he'll be a heavy underdog coming into this fight. As for what'll end up happening, we'll just have to wait and see. So, from O'Malley seemingly having an upper hand over the Funk Master, to him storming up the octagon to confront his bitter rival, that was why Sean O'Malley called out Aljamain Sterling